Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. All right, so let's get started with this, hopefully what will be a short lecture. All right, so get your pen and pad, your pen and notebooks, or your pencil and notebooks, or your device or laptop, whatever you take notes on, so that you can also take notes. Okay, the title of this lesson is Bantu Kaffirs, Semitic Hebrew for Atonement. Bantu Kaffirs, Semitic Hebrew for Atonement. Okay, and this is a presentation of the Mississippi Center for AFRO-HEBRAIC Culture and Research. Again, this is a presentation of the Mississippi Center for AFRO-HEBRAIC Culture and Research. All right, the objective. This short lecture, I was sure I fixed all my. I went through for these history lessons. I actually go through and proofread, and I'm like, thought I for sure caught every typo. All right, sorry y'all. This short lecture is on the origins of the word Kaffir and its relation to Bantu peoples. Again, this short lecture is on the origins of the word Kaffir and its relation to Bantu peoples. Just like how the N-word in America is actually Hebraic in origin and goes back from Hebrew to Akkadian and Sumerian, the word Kaffir also has the same etymological background, right? And the word Kaffir in South Africa is similar to the N-word here. In South Africa, they call it the K-word. Here in America, you know, you have the N-word, right? But in reality, both words tie the people back to their Hebrew ancestry, okay? And we have lessons that deal with the origins of the N-word and how actually the etymological origins of the N-word are in your Old Testament, in the Tanakh in Hebrew. You just don't see it because you're reading it in English. But if you read it in Hebrew, Niga is in there like 100 times. All right, and it's the same and it's the same word where we get the N-word from. The etymological origins of it go back to the Hebrew, and from before the Hebrew, it goes back to the Akkadian and then to the Sumerian. The Sumerian language, that's the language of Babel, like the language that was spoken at Babel when everybody had one language. All right. But though I have yet to upload those lectures onto the center's YouTube. So be looking for those lectures. I'll probably upload those in the next few weeks. The lectures we did dealing with that. All right. But again, this short lecture is on the origins of the word Kaffir and its relation to Bantu peoples. Just like how the N-word in America is actually Hebraic in origin and goes back from Hebrew to Akkadian and Sumerian, the word Kaffir also has the same etymological background, meaning the word Kaffir goes back when you trace its origins to the Hebrew, and then from the Hebrew to the Akkadian, and then from the Akkadian to the Sumerian. Both are bywords that accurately ties the people spoken of to their biblical origins. And I'm going to repeat that. Both are bywords that accurately ties the people spoken of to their biblical origins. Deuteronomy 28, verses 36 through 37. The Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known. And there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Right? So the K word, Kaffir, the N word, Nigar, however you want to pronounce it, have become bywords, right? But originally they weren't bywords. Okay? The word Kaffir is used to describe the Bantu-speaking peoples of Eastern and Southern Africa. It's not the only word, it's one of the words. But the word Kaffir is one of the words used to describe the Bantu-speaking peoples of Eastern and Southern Africa, as well as those in South Asia, right? The Bantu people that have been transported there via the diaspora. The word was introduced by Arab and Persian merchants, then later adopted by the English, Portuguese, and Dutch. The word Kaffir comes from the Arabic kafara, which in turn derives from the Hebrew word for atonement. My position here is that the Bantus no longer look at this word as a slur, but instead view it as another particle of evidence for their Hebraic Israelitish origins. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. So my position here is that Bantus no longer look at this word as a slur, but instead view it as another particle of evidence for their Hebraic Israelitish origins. Okay. The term, talking about Kafir, the term has its etymological roots in the Arabic word kafir, meaning one who must atone. That's what it means in Arabic. Kafir means one who must atone. The word was primarily used by Arab and Persian slave traders for the Judeo-Christian and pagan Zanj, that's the Bantu peoples, along the Swahili coast and Horn of Africa. Right? I'm going to repeat that. The word was primarily used by Arab and Persian slave traders for the Judeo-Christian and pagan Zanj, Bantu peoples along the Swahili coast and Horn of Africa. It was also used to describe, it was also used for some of the people in the interior, in the interior away from the coast as well. All right. Portuguese, and just for a reminder, I put the slide up before on my background. For undergrad, all right, I went to Oral Roberts University and Cal State University, Dominguez Hills. I did 2 years. I did my freshman and sophomore years of college at Oral Roberts University. And my major there while I was there was history. And I was minoring in political science at the time. And then I transferred to Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, and completed my major in history. And I minored in African studies. So my undergrad minor is in African studies, and my major was in history. And then for grad school, I went to Mississippi State University, and my focus or concentration was on social sciences. So that's just a little bit on my academic background. So, I'm not just somebody up here, talking, but don't have the academic background behind them. All right. So I have here in our lecture notes, again, the term has its etymological roots in the Arabic word kafir, meaning one who must atone. The word was primarily used by Arab and Persian slave traders for the Judeo-Christian and pagan Zanj, those are Bantu peoples, along the Swahili coast and Horn of Africa. Portuguese explorers who arrived on the East African coast in 1498 en route to India found it in common use by coastal Arabs. In Portuguese, it became Kaffirs, C-A-F-R-E-S. Portuguese use passed the term to several non-Muslim areas, including Kapari in Senegalese and Kapari in Malayan, right? So that's in India. Those are all places in India and South Asia. So they use the word there in Senegalese became Kapari, and in Malayalam it became Kapari or Kapari, okay, which are used in Western India and Sri Lanka to describe the Bantu population native to there. And the reason I say native to there is because they've been there now. Some of them have been there for over 1,000 years in the diaspora. Some of them have been there. Some of them have been there for over 1,000 years. Some have been there for almost 2,000 years. Some it's only been about 500 years or a few hundred years, but nonetheless, they've been there for a while. All right. And again, that's from the diaspora of Bantu Israelites. Now, variations of the word were used in English, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Dutch as a general term for several different ethnic groups in Southern Africa from the 17th century to the early 20th century. As English Kafir with the 2 F's and Dutch Kafir, right, with the ER at the end, the term became a pejorative slur for Bantus and Cape colors during the apartheid era of South African history. Now the DEI government That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's the term we use here in America. But South Africa has the same thing. They now claim the word as hate speech, so you can get in trouble for using it in South Africa, which is absurd. All of these things, I always go over this. Like even here in America, black is not a nation, it's not a country. And most of us aren't even black in the first place. In your color, are you the same color as a lump of charcoal? No, right? Most of us are different shades of brown, or bronze, or yellow. Most of us are not jet black. All right. And even in Africa, most are not jet black. It's only really like certain groups that be jet black. Okay. And there's no country called black land. There's no country called black country. Can't find that on the map, right? That's why here in America, I don't like the term black. I prefer African American. Negro is fine too, because there was a Negro land, right? And Negro comes from the same thing as Negar. There's Nigeria, which is land of Negars, and there's a country called Niger, right? These are all, and back when they were transporting slaves here to the Americas, there was a place on the map called Negro land, right? That stretched from Western Africa to Central Africa. Okay. These are all accurate terms to identify people. And when you look up the original definition of Negro, right, before it became an all-encompassing term for all peoples that they identify as black, originally Negro only applied to Bantus and certain West Africans, so your Niger Congos. That's what it originally applied to, right? And Niger Congo looking type people, so like your Melanesians. That's what it originally applied to. Okay. Same thing here with this work. And so in South Africa, same thing. You got a lot of people running around calling themselves Black South Africans. They don't want to be called Bantu. They don't like the term Kaffir. These terms actually identify who you are, right? Black does not, right? Now, I have here in our notes, now the DEI government regards it as hate speech under current South African law. And I'm like, I so proofread this. All right. So when one truly understands, and I want this perfect. When one truly understands the origins of the word and the true Hebraic ancestry of Bantus, it should not be considered hate speech. I'm going to repeat that. When one truly understands the origins of the word and the true Hebraic ancestry of Bantus, it should not be considered hate speech. It is a Hebrew word describing a Hebrew people who believe in the atonement blood of Jesus, Yeshua, Yesu. Right? I'm going to repeat that again. When one truly understands the origins of the word and the true Hebraic ancestry of Bantus, it should not be considered hate speech. It is a Hebrew word describing a Hebrew people who believe in the atonement blood of Jesus, Yeshua, Yesu, Yamasihi. All right. Now, this is an excerpt from Oxford's English Dictionary, which is an academic dictionary. Again, this is an excerpt from Oxford's English Dictionary. From the starting point, it is perhaps a little surprising that just over a decade later, we find evidence of Kaffir being used both as a noun and as an adjective in reference to the Nguni peoples of southeastern Africa without any detectable offensive impact or derogatory intent. All right, so this is letting you know that originally the word didn't have any derogatory nature behind it. Okay, none whatsoever. Okay, and the Nguni people, those are Israelites too. They're Bantus. They migrated. Originally, they were up in Central Africa, Northeastern Africa, right? Because originally they came from Israel, but they were up there first for a while, and then in medieval times and within like the last 500 years, they migrated down to Southern Africa, right? Southern Africa. And you find them today primarily living in South Africa, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe. All right, now, and just for reference, the Nguni peoples, these are your Hausa, and I can't do it's not Hausa like the Nigerian ones, the Chadic speaking peoples. They descend from the ancient Assyrians, ancient Cushitic Assyrians, and they're Chadic peoples. This is the Hausa, and I can't, I tried my best, no disrespect. The Hausa people from Southern Africa, right? They're Ngunis, the Zulu, the Swazi people, all right, etc. All right, now, it says here, from this starting point, it is perhaps a little surprising that just over a decade later, we find evidence of Kaffir being used both as a noun and as an adjective in reference to the Nguni peoples of southeastern Africa without any detectable offensive impact or derogatory intent. For Thomas Hickok in 1588, translating, and I just uploaded the video about the Bantu Israelites in South Africa, that lecture that we did like 7 years ago. I just uploaded that, like we did that lecture 7 or 8 years ago. I uploaded that onto the Mississippi Center for Afro-Hebraic Research and Cultures YouTube page this weekend. So if you haven't watched that lecture, that would be a good lecture to go back and watch after this one, right? For more context. All right. Now, because we deal with the Nguni peoples in there. When the Europeans encountered the Nguni people, specifically the Zulus, the Europeans all recognized them as Israelites. All right. We talk about that in that lecture. All right. As descendants from the ancient Israelites. For Thomas Hickok in 1588, translating into English Cesare Federici's account, or Caesar Federici's account in his native Italian of his travels across the world, the use of the Kaffir to refer to the Nguni peoples and the description of Nguni traders as Kaffir merchants in both instances corresponds to Italian Caffaro in Federici's text. Appears to have been just as neutral in tone as the nouns and adjectives we use today when simply conveying that a person is from a particular group or region, right? Belarusian, for example, or Fijian, for somebody from Fiji. So letting you know, originally, this was not a racist term. I was seeing if it would block if I put myself to the lower, but it will, so I'll just keep myself there. All right, originally, this term, it had no negative connotation. It was just used to describe a people from a particular region. And the word is a Hebrew word when you trace its origins, right? And that Hebrew word goes back to the Akkadian and the Sumerian, right? And that shouldn't be any surprise to you because that the word Bantu is a Hebrew word. The same, it goes back to the Hebrew word Anu, right? Which means people. Same thing that it means for Bantu. Bantu, Anu. And the Ba is just a prefix, right? It's really Antu, right? And in Hebrew, it's Anu, and it means the same thing, basically the people, okay? That word goes back to ancient Mesopotamia, to the Akkadians and the Sumerians, right? And their word, they have a word too, Anu, for the people, right? It's really for the people, for their gods, like for their gods, okay? This is because the Bantus are the original man, the original human, all right? And the first civilization, right, post the flood was the Sumerians, okay? Science even confirms this. Y chromosomal atom has been traced to the Imbo people from Cameroon, which are a Bantu group. And they found that DNA in an African-American man from South Carolina, a descendant of slaves, who still carried the Y chromosomal atom DNA in him. This is just extra learning on your way to learning, right? And those people are Bantu. This is confirmed by science. So Adam and Eve, because remember the Bible tells you Eve came from out of Adam, right? Adam and Eve were Bantu. The first original man, the first original people were Bantu, okay? Again, this is just extra learning on your way to learning. All right, so it says here, to Hickok, it seems the Kaffir was as natural and inoffensive a way of referring to the Nguni peoples as the Portugal was of referring to the Portuguese. Since it seems that this use developed from Kaffir being used by Muslims in Africa as a derogatory way of referring to the non-Muslim indigenous peoples, it is difficult to explain this neutrality in tone, but it persisted for a period. We have found instances from 1820 onwards. The reason why it wasn't viewed as negative was because the Bantus didn't want to become Muslim, and they didn't care about it's not derogatory to them because they don't take offense to being, non-Muslim, right? Anyways, I digress, but I don't digress. Islam is not our people's religion, right? Some people in Africa, that's their religion, right? But not the Bantus. All right. Now, it says here, we have found, and again, I'm skipping. This is just an excerpt from the entry on Kaffir, right? This part now, I skipped forward to another paragraph in the entry. We have found instances from 1820 onwards of Kaffir being used in reference to the languages of the Nguni peoples. Another development of this type is the use of Kaffaria and British Kaffaria, all right? Same thing as Nigeria. Nigeria means what? Land of Nigers or land of niggers. You put the IA at the end, that's what it means, right? That suffix, it goes back to the Latin. That IA means land of. So Kaffaria meant land of Kaffirs. And that word, again, Kaffir, we're going to show you tonight, is a Hebrew word, right? So again, if it's a Hebrew word, that means these are Hebraic peoples, okay? And the Bible it tells you, right, the nations were divided by language and bloodline. Bloodline meaning patrilineal descent, and by their languages, okay? That's how the nations were divided in Genesis 10. So if you want to trace a people back, you need to see their language and the words used to describe them as a people, right? And so again, this word used to describe the Bantus in southern and eastern Africa is a Hebrew word, right? A Semitic word. So where do the Bantus trace back to? From Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They trace back to Shem, okay? They trace back to Shem. Now, when you're looking at Africans, it's the Berbers, the Nilotics, the Cushitic peoples, and the Chadic peoples who go back to Ham, okay? Even though the Berbers now, their language is put in the, I know it's an Afro-Asiatic family, but have they put it in under Semitic in that? Let me see. No. Yeah, so anyways, Berbers, Nilotics, Chadic peoples, Cushitic peoples, Khoisan, so your Hottentots, those go back to Ham, all right? Your Bantus and like the Niger branch from West Africa and the Niger Congo, our Niger Bantu family, they go back to Shem. Your Habesha peoples from Eastern Africa, right? The Abyssinians, they go back to Shem. All right, now, it says here, we have found instances from 1820 onwards of Kaffir being used in reference to the languages of the Nguni peoples. Another development of this type is the use of Kaffaria and British Kaffaria to refer to the part of southeastern Africa inhabited by the Hosha people, to whom the later use of Kaffir in relation to the Nguni peoples often refers specifically. Not simply a geographical area. In the 19th century, this was also a political entity, right? In another kingdom you had near them, just tying this back to the Hebrew, like their Hebraic origins, you also had a kingdom near them called Gaza in southeastern Africa near Kaffaria. This is all just extra learning on your way to learning. All right, so not simply a geographical area in the 19th century, this was also a political entity with its own laws, and it is now part of South Africa's Eastern Cape province, though, of course, referring to it as either Kaffraria or British Kaffraria today is quite unthinkable. It is difficult to know precisely how and why Kaffirs shifted from being used neutrally in reference to the Nguni peoples. It's the same thing here in America with the word Negro, right? With the word Negro and the word Nigar. Again, there's a country called Nigeria. Half of the African Americans that were brought here, half of all African American descendants of slaves and indentured servants and free persons of color, half of them have, whether you're full-blooded or mixed, half of them have ancestry that comes from Nigeria, right? Hence Negro, hence Nigar, right? But I digress. So it says here, it is difficult to know precisely how and why Kaffirs shifted from being used neutrally in reference to the Nguni peoples, their language, their lands, and so on, to become a highly offensive and racially sensitive word. But it seems that an important part of the picture is it coming to be used more generally in reference to any Black African. So that's when they're saying here that it started to become a slur when it just started being used for any Black African, rather than specifically to a member of one of the Nguni peoples, right? I took this from Online Etymology Dictionary, the entry for Kaffir on the Online Etymology Dictionary, right? 1790, infidel. Earlier, and also Kafri from the 1600s, from the Arabic Kaffir, unbeliever, infidel, impious wretch, with a literal sense of one who does not admit the blessings of God. And this is the European interpretation of the Arabic word. That's not really the definition of the Arabic word fully. That's only slightly correct. From kafara it goes back to the Arabic word kafara, which means to cover up, conceal, deny, blot out, right? And again, that goes back to atonement, to blot out one's sins, to cover up. You know how, like, the first time you have this word in the Hebrew, in the Torah, right? And the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and in the Torah is in Genesis chapter 6, when Noah is building the ark and he has to cover it with pitch. The word that's used there is kafar, right? In Hebrew, same thing, to cover. Okay. All right. So goes back to the Arabic word kafara, to cover up, conceal, deny, blot out. Technically a non-Muslim, but in Ottoman times, it came to be used there almost exclusively as a disparaging word for Christian. Okay. And the Ottomans, just for reference, the Ottomans during their empire, right, which is from like the 1400s all the way up to the 1900s, they had set up shop and even had a couple colonies. And the Ottomans came from what is today the modern day country of Turkey. They had a couple colonies along the eastern coast of Africa. They also eventually ended up taking over Egypt and Nubia, Sudan. So when it's saying here that it was a word used by the Ottomans for Christians, this is talking about in Africa as well, right? This is talking about in what would be today modern day Egypt, right? And in modern day, Egypt, the modern day countries of Sudan and South Sudan, right? Because Sudan and South Sudan, when it was Nubia, was Christian all the way up to the 1500s, right? Sudan, the country of Sudan, didn't become Muslim until the last like 400 years. And even then, you still had a remnant of Christians there. And in Egypt, it didn't become predominantly Muslim till the 1100s and like 1200s. And you still had a minority of Christians there who make up 10 to 20% of the population. These are Coptic Christians from the Egyptian Coptic Church and the Nubian Coptic Church. Excuse me. And then in Eastern Africa, the Ottomans used this to refer to the Habesha and the Bantus, who were a part of the Abyssinian tradition, right? And the Jew, also the ones who still practice Old Testament only, right? Because in Africa, you still had a lot of the people who were Christian, and they were also originally Jews, Israelites by blood, right? And so that's why with the Christianity in Africa, it's Judeo-Christian. They circumcise their males. They don't eat pork. They keep the dietary law. They keep the weekly Sabbath. Even if they go to church on Sunday, they still keep the weekly Sabbath. This is just extra learning on your way to learning. We have history lesson lectures on that as well that we did years ago that I gotta stop saying I did years ago. And we'll be uploading those onto the Mississippi Center for Afro-HEBRAIC Research and Cultures YouTube channel over the next coming months, right? But anyway, so this term was used by the Ottomans in Africa to describe Bantu Christians, Habesha Christians in Eastern Africa, right? And it was also used by the Ottomans to describe Nilotic Christians, right? Excuse me, in Egypt and in Sudan and South Sudan, the modern day countries of Sudan and South Sudan. Again, just extra learning on your way to learning. It was also used by Muslims in East Africa of the pagan Black Africans. English missionaries then picked it up as an equivalent of heathen to refer to Bantus in South Africa, 1731, from which use in English it came generally to mean South African Black, regardless of ethnicity, and to be a term of abuse at least since 1934. Right? This is why I wanted to read what we read prior to this. Oops. Backed out. Give me just a second. This is why I wanted to read what we just read from Oxford's English Dictionary, because that gives you a more thorough breakdown of the word. All right. So I have here in our notes, ultimately, it comes from the Arabic, right? Kafar, right? Which is infidel, right? Or kafir, unbeliever, both of which comes from kafara in the Arabic, which means to cover, to hide. In some especially early uses via Spanish kafri, Dutch kafir, or other European languages. Al-kafara is a term in Islamic law meaning the expiation of sin, or more specifically, to compensate for commissioning a sinful act, or what is paid to redress an imbalance that is a kind of penalty or punishment. Okay, in Hebrew, right, this is called al-kapara, right? Al-kapara, it's the same. So in Arabic with the Muslims, you have al-kafara. And in Judaism with the Jews, you have al-kapara. It's the same thing. It's the act of making atonement. Okay? All right. And the Jews have a ritual that they do prior to Yom Kippur that they call al-kapara, right? That's why when you really break down it makes no sense Jews and Muslims fighting. It also makes no sense for anybody to convert and become a Muslim, because Islam is just a bastard religion of Judeo-Christianity. So you might as well just go back to the original, because everything the Muslims do is just a backwards version of what the Jews and real Christians do. When I said real Christians, I'm not talking about Roman Catholics. Okay? When Muhammad was coming up with Islam, right, Muhammad was primarily dealing with Jews from Ethiopia and Yemen. And he was primarily dealing with Christians from East Africa and Yemen. That's who he was dealing with. This is extra learning on your way to learning. It wasn't primarily Roman Catholics. That's a foreign religion, right? That's not Christianity. That's the pagan religion of the Roman Empire repackaged. Okay. Muhammad was dealing with the Jews and the Christians from Eastern Africa, right? And from Southern Arabia. This is just extra learning on your way to learning. So he ripped off a bunch of stuff from them and created his bastard religion. Okay. And you always should, if you want the truth, you should always go to the original. You should always go to the source. Okay. So same thing with Islam. That's not the original. That's not the source. If you want the truth, go back to the Jews. That's the original. Okay. That's why there's so many things similar between Islam and the Jews. All right. I have here in our notes examples of expiation that the Muslims do, or examples of sinful acts include violating Ramadan fasting, violating Ahram restrictions in Hajj, consciously hurting a person or animal. Right? Examples of expiation, right, or atonement of them include fasting for 2 consecutive months, freeing a Muslim slave. Remember, they're not when they say fasting, they only fast from dawn till dusk. So it's not literally not eating food for two months. That's not what they mean. They just fast from dawn till dusk. Freeing a Muslim slave, paying for food to feed 60 poor people, or slaughtering a goat. Notice they're slaughtering a goat because they ripped that off from the Israelites. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. All right. The root of al-kafara is the Arabic kafar, which means covering. In the Quran, kafara as a kind of worship in the way that Allah ignores sins and covers them. Kafara literally means a trait that tends to the expiation or atonement of sin. Okay. This in turn traces its roots to the Hebrew word for atonement. Right. So the Arabic word kafir, where you get this term kafir, right, for the Bantus in southern and eastern Africa, right, goes to the Hebrew word kippur, right? So kafir goes to the Hebrew word kippur, right? And this Arabic word, right, because the kafir traces its roots back to kafara, right? Kafara goes back to kapara and kapara in Hebrew, okay? And I should have put in here another one here for kapur, because kapur is the plural. So kafar, that's the singular. All right. So this in turn traces its roots to the Hebrew word for atonement, the kafir in Arabic going back to kafar in Hebrew, kapur for the plural. And then the kafara goes back to kapara, right, in the Hebrew. And for Jews, kapara is a ritual by which one seeks atonement. And just for reference, as I'm pulling this up so we can look at it in the Hebrew, the Hebrew word goes back to the Akkadian and the Sumerian kaparu, which means the same thing, to make atonement. All right, this is Strong's Hebrew 3722. So when you hear kafir, right, for Bantus, this is where the word kafir originates from, right? It shouldn't be viewed as offensive. It ties you back to being Hebrew. It ties you back to your origins. You're a Semitic people, right? Notice kafar.
Strong's H 3722. Kafir. Kafir.
The KJV translates Strong's Hebrew 3722 in the following manner: atonement 71 times, purge 7 times, reconciliation 4 times, reconcile 3 times, forgive 3 times, purge away 2 times. This is why I strongly recommend for Bantus, don't abandon this word. This word should remind you of who you need to seek for atonement. I have Bantu ancestry. Aren't most of us Christian? Right? Don't most of us believe in Yeshua? Don't most of us believe in Yeshua HaMashiach? And I would say now a lot of us have come back to the knowledge of self, of realizing we descend from the Israelites, the original Jews, right? And this word one of the words that's used to describe you means atonement in Hebrew. So instead of viewing it as a slur, when you hear this word, you should look at it as a term of pride, because we're a Semitic people, and it should point your mind to Christ. the true atonement. Okay. All right. It's translated as forgive 3 times, purge away 2 times, pacify 2 times, atonement made 2 times, merciful 2 times, cleansed 1 time, disannulled 1 time, appease 1 time, put off 1 time, pardon 1 time, pitch 1 time. And that pitch is used in Genesis 6, right? When with Noah's Ark. Okay. Now, no. Outline of biblical usage: to cover, purge, make an atonement, make reconciliation, cover over with pitch. The qual usage: to coat or cover with pitch. The pael usage: to cover over, pacify, propitiate, to cover over, atone for sin, make atonement for, to cover over, atone for sin and persons by legal rights. The pual usage: to be covered over, to make atonement for. The hapael: to be covered over. Strong's definition: kaffir, a primitive root to cover, specifically with bitumen, figuratively to expiate or condone, to placate or cancel. Appease, make an atonement, cleanse, disannul, forgive, be merciful, pacify, pardon, purge away, put off, make reconciliation. All right. And it has here, this is from Jacinius Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon, has the Arabic version, which is kaffir, right? Or kafara, to cover. All right. Get some examples from the scriptures. Genesis 6 and 14. That's the examples with Noah and Noah's Ark. All right. But here, Exodus 29 and 36. And thou shalt offer every day a bullock for a sin offering for atonement. And thou shalt cleanse the altar when thou hast made an atonement for it. And thou shalt anoint it to sanctify it. All right, let's get to Yom Kippur. Leviticus 16, this is dealing with Day of Atonement. But the goat, and remember, Islam ripped this off from us. And we just read about how Muslims, you can slaughter a goat to make atonement. Again, they ripped that off. This predates Islam. What we're reading here predates Islam by over 2,000 years, buddy. All right? Because Islam doesn't come around to the 600s AD. What we're reading here in Leviticus chapter 16, this is Moses, right, in the 1500s BC. So 2,000 years before Islam. You might as well go with the original, buddy. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement. And you have there that Strong's Hebrew 3722, kafar, right? That's where the word kafir for Bantus comes from, right? Now, let's look at the other one, Kippur. All right, this is Strong's Hebrew 3725, Kippur.
Strong's H 3725. Kipparim. Kipparim.
And the reason why they have im at the end is because it's the plural of the word kafar that we just read, that we just looked at. That's why it has here the root of this word goes back to what the one we just looked at, Strong's Hebrew 3722. All right. The KJV translates Strong's Hebrew 3725 in the following manner: atonement 8 times. All right. Kippur, from Strong's Hebrew 3722, expiation only in the plural, right? So the plural form of atonement. And just to get a scriptural example, we have here Leviticus 23, verses 27 through 28. Also on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord. And ye shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement for you before the Lord your God. All right, let's go back to our notes. So the Bantus of southern and eastern Africa, which later were also transported to South and Southeast Asia as part of their Israelitish diaspora, are of Hebrew ancestry. And you have Bantus brought over here to the Americas, right, in the diaspora as well. But over here in the Americas, they didn't use the word Kafir. They used the word Nigar, right, and Negro, which also is a Hebrew word, right? So anyway, that goes back to the Akkadian and the Sumerian. It doesn't have a negative connotation. It goes back to being king or the representative of the king, right? Or the ruler, or the representative of the ruler, the one who speaks for the ruler. That's where the N word goes back to in Hebrew, and from Hebrew to the Sumerian and the Akkadian. Okay. All right. And how it came in, anyways. So, and how it came into into Africa's usage is with the Bantu languages and the Habesha's languages, like with Nagus, right, or Nigos, right, meaning the name for the ruler. Prior to that, it goes back to ancient Hebrew, and from the ancient Hebrew, it goes back to the Akkadian and the Sumerian. It's the same thing with this word Kafir, right? And with Kafir, it goes back to the word in Hebrew for atonement. All right. So I have here in the notes the Bantus of southern and eastern Africa, which later were transported to South and Southeast Asia as part of their Israelitish diaspora, are of Hebrew ancestry. So, like, for example, the Bantus in Sri Lanka, they're called Sri Lankan Kaffirs, right? Their religion was either Judeo-Christian or the idolatry practiced by the Jews of the Old Testament, right? So these Bantus that it was used to refer to, either the religion that they practiced, because they didn't want to become Muslim, they were either Judeo-Christian or pagan, right? And the paganism that they were practicing was the same type of idolatry that the Israelites practiced in the Old Testament, right? When they weren't following the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay. Their geographic region was called Kafaria because they are Hebrews who refused to become Muslims and believed and let me fix my typo. All right. And I have here, and believed either in the atonement of Yeshua Masih or in blood sacrifices to idols, spirits, ancestors for atonement, one or the other. Like they either believed in the atonement of Yeshua Masih, right? That's Jesus Christ in Swahili, which is the Bantu language, or in the blood sacrifices to idols, spirits, ancestors for atonement, one or the other. In Swahili, the largest Bantu language spoken in the world, this word is Kafunika, right? Kafunika. It's like, again, showing you its origins going back to Kafir and Kapur in the Hebrew, right? In Swahili, it's Kafunika, right? Romans 5 and verse 11. And not only so, but we also joy in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have now received the atonement. I'm going to read that again, Romans 5 and 11. And not only so, but we also joy in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom we have now received the atonement. Okay. So I'm going to go back now to my original position for this lecture. My position here is that Bantus no longer look at this word as a slur, but instead view it as another particle of evidence for their Hebraic Israelitish origins, right? And I also had here at the end of this paragraph, it is a Hebrew word describing a Hebrew people who believe in the atonement blood of Jesus, Yeshua, Yesu, right? So if you're Bantu, that word Kafir to describe you should point you back to the atonement of Christ, all right? Shalom, and hopefully you learn from this lecture. All right, shalom aleichem.